Imagine hearing a deafening noise outside your house, and when you go to investigate the cause, you find something even more frightening. One Russian man claims he experienced exactly that. But what exactly did he find? Take a look. It's 2011 in a small village in Russia. A local farmer reports that his home is shaken by a large explosion nearby. While looking for the source, the farmer stumbles upon this. Some remains that look nothing like the usual local wildlife. Take a good look. The creature has a strange head and an even stranger torso and limbs. And the state it's in is even more puzzling. It appears petrified. The way this finding is displayed in the video is also quite intriguing.
What's very interesting to me is that they're drying some corn at the same time. And I wouldn't think you'd want to put something alien next to a food resource.
According to the source who gave us this video, the cause of the explosion was never found. But residents of the town were more frightened by what this creature could portend for their village. Journalist Aaron McCarthy says local legends could explain why.
In Slavic folklore, there's Baba Yaga, a witch who lives in the woods in a shack that has chicken legs and chicken feet. She also steals and eats children.
Baba Yaga has become the equivalent to the boogeyman for kids in this region. Some locals may have believed this creature was her handiwork, but McCarthy says there could be another slightly less creepy explanation.
Permafrost is melting in Russia, and with that melting, all kinds of extinct creatures are popping up, like mammoths and rhinos. So potentially, this creature is something that's extinct that we just don't know about yet.
Now, there are some conditions on Earth that could instantly mummify a living creature, like the super alkaline waters of Lake Natron in Tanzania. But there's no evidence something like that currently exists in Russia. So before we determine if this video shows an undiscovered dinosaur or even a child-eating witch, our experts will dig deeper. First, video forensic analyst Mick West examines whether this specimen could be some kind of hoax.
I think the only way you could have done that is to have modeled it from life, and that means that you actually had the real thing to start off with. So I think the simplest explanation here is that what we're seeing is what we're getting. This is in fact a dead animal that has been partially or fully mummified.
If this is indeed some kind of animal, what kind of animal?
Just in terms of the morphology, something about its face looks quite bird-like to me. It looks like it could have part of the beak that had formed off or not been preserved in this mummification process, but it's got a really big eye socket. Birds tend to have quite small eyes, so for me that would kind of rule out a bird.
That X's out it being one of Baba Yaga's chickens. Biologist Floyd Hayes is thinking mammal.
Okay, right here it looks like there may be some teeth in the jaws. To me, the skull looks much more like a mammal. It does look like there may be a wing. It could potentially be a fruit bat. There are some large species of fruit bats called flying foxes.
Furman sees some merit in the bat theory.
They also do have that similar large nose that we can see in this fossil. In terms of their skeleton, they do have a long neck as well. And going right to the end of what looks like it could have been wings, they have what looks like it was a claw or a hand of some sort.
So it kind of looks like a large fruit bat. But here's the problem.
They don't live up in Russia, though. They're more characteristic of the tropical islands in the Western Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean and in southeastern Asia.
Floyd says until this family comes forward with the specimen, we can't be certain what it is.
The process of mummification could take a long period of time. It's possible that this is an extinct species of animal that formerly lived in Russia that is no longer there today.
So I know we're going out on a limb here, but for now, we're going to say this is an unidentified extinct animal. Of course, it would take proper scientific examination to know for sure, but with the Arctic warming 2 times faster than the global average, we may see more strange creatures thawing out from the permafrost soon. For a good quarter of a century, the creature you're about to see has captivated the minds of ufologists and pathologists alike. Is it an alien? Is it a mutant? Or perhaps just a rare Russian pet? The details of this mystery are as fascinating as the video itself. And the video is pretty fascinating. It is early August 1996 in the industrial town of Kishtim in the Russian Ural Mountains. While investigating a robbery, police detective Vladimir Bendlin stumbles upon a shocking discovery. A local woman shows him a grotesque creature that makes his stomach turn.
В квартире находился, значит, такой запах необычный. Ну, какой-то мускусно-сладкий такой тошнотворный запах.
It was around 10 inches long and hairless. It had brownish, grayish skin, a really strange skull with ridges and protruding eyes. The woman said she'd found the creature weeks earlier near a cemetery still alive. She lovingly dubbed it Alyoshenka and said her family cared for it for a few weeks until it finally died. Bendlin says the woman's mental state was questionable and the details of her story inconsistent, but he still needed to identify this body.
Вот, ну, показали чисто вот визуально сотрудникам городской больницы Кыштымской.
A first examination of the specimen determined it was likely a human fetus. But Detective Bendlin took it to a pathologist for a second opinion. And according to forensic investigator Chase Klotsky, the evidence was anything but clear.
There are several things missing. Ears, nose, genitals. Probably the most striking piece that we found that really puzzles everybody is it's absolutely absent of a navel.
No belly button? That's odd. But perhaps there's an equally unusual explanation.
In 1957, there was a disaster at a military facility near Kishtim. There was an explosion in a tank where nuclear waste was stored, and it sent a radioactive plume over many nearby villages. Some have speculated that Alyoshenka might be a deformed fetus caused by the fallout from that disaster.
Detective Bendlin also brought the body to someone he hoped could determine if perhaps Alyoshenka was not of this earth at all.
He did eventually give the mummified corpse to some UFO investigators.
But the case then took another strange turn.
After which, it vanished without a trace. So now, only videos and photos of Alyoshenka survive.
The Kishtim explosion was actually the worst nuclear disaster until Chernobyl. But the Soviet government didn't come clean about it until 1989. So is Alyoshenka linked to the fallout? Was it a visitor from somewhere even further away? Our experts are on the case. Science writer Mick West weighs the theory that this is some kind of extraterrestrial specimen.
It looks a bit alien-like. But the thing about aliens in popular culture is they often look like babies. They have big bulbous heads, and they have small bodies, and they have skinny limbs.
West thinks the creature's inhuman eyes and head are most likely explained by the Kishtim disaster.
I think what we have is a badly deformed child because of mix-up in the genetic code. It could be something that came from radiation in that area.
But anthropologist Kathy Strain thinks the creature predates the 1957 explosion by millennia.
It looks like it's a human infant that died in childbirth. Its head is cone-shaped like that due to the birthing process. And eventually, they became mummified. I do not believe that this woman had this alive for 3 weeks. It is clearly very old, maybe even 1,000 years old.
Interestingly, the woman who claims to have found this specimen alive was eventually taken to a psychiatric facility. But Detective Bendlin says family members who backed up her story seemed entirely trustworthy.
Ну, тут как судить? В принципе, мало ли что тут сложно. А может, на самом деле было. Я не берусь вот рассуждать и установить не представилось возможным.
All right, this one continues to be confounding. Based solely on the video evidence, our verdict is that Alyoshenka is a mummified infant. However, until the body is recovered and a DNA test is performed, we can't say for sure. We often wonder about the vastness of space and the unexplored depths of the oceans. But there's also a whole world of the unexplained beneath our feet. In this next story, something massive with huge claws seems to be tunneling through the earth. Take a look. On a Friday evening in 2008, geology professor Heinrich Frank is homebound on the freeway past the town of Novo Hamburgo, Brazil. Something catches his eye at a construction site on the side of the road. Take a look.
The first tunnel I found was very, very small. And when I entered, I see immediately the claw marks on the walls.
Look closer. Dr. Frank focuses on this, grooves dug into the tunnel walls, then slashes in the surface. What could have made these marks? Dr. Frank's research dates the caves to be about 12,000 years old. And there's reason to think they aren't just natural formations.
Taking a close look at them from a scientific point of view, they don't appear to be natural caves based on the types of rocks that they're being cut in. Some of these rocks are much harder than the easy rocks that would be broke by water. They also have a really weird shape in that they're more horizontal than they are vertical, which tells me that something carved these tunnels out.
Then when you consider all the megafauna, you have only two animals with the necessary claws to build tunnels, the armadillos and the sloths.
We're talking now about the Pleistocene era, which ended 11,700 years ago. It was the age of megafauna, gargantuan mammals like mastodons, and in this case, perhaps the famous giant sloth. Could Frank have discovered some sort of ancient burrow? Or could such an animal, believed to be extinct, still be living there today?
When you go inside these tunnels, sometimes you feel like the animal is on the next corner.
The fossil record shows that megalonyx sloths were the size of present-day bull elephants, but throw in 3 massive claws on each forearm used for defense. They roamed the Western Hemisphere when humans first arrived.
One can only imagine how terrifying it must have been to try to hunt these giant ground sloths. In fact, there has been evidence found of these giant ground sloths, the mylodonts, that were actually trapped in a cave in Argentina and corralled and kept as a food source by primitive humans.
Giant sloths and humans together? If it sounds like something out of a horror film instead of history, a recent find will change your mind. At White Sands in New Mexico, archaeologists uncovered the prints of a giant sloth being followed by humans. They were stalking it. So could these giants still be around? Did they dig the Brazilian tunnels? And if not them, then what did?
If you take a look at one of the tops or the ceilings of one of these caverns, you'll see that there looks like claw marks.
So geologist Bob Anderson thinks some sort of burrowing creature made these caves. And what if these animals still exist? Archaeologist Ed Barnhart says not so fast.
Well, some people have suggested that these giant caves are actually the holes and burrows. Well, that's an interesting idea, but show me the artifacts.
So far, there's no proof. No one has captured a giant sloth, found a carcass, or taken a single picture of one.
So I can take giant sloth right off the list.
And Barnhart even questions if giant sloths ever dug these tunnels at all.
Look down in this section here. Look, there's one, there's one coming across here. There is no reason to believe that these are claw marks because they would be repeatedly sections of 3.
Barnhart makes a good point, but if a giant 3-toed sloth had uneven claws, it might leave 1, 2, or 3 marks depending on how hard it was digging. Still, Barnhart thinks it's more likely the marks were created by an extinct worm-like creature called a trilobite. Some were predators. The biggest weighed as much as 10 pounds, and they were known to burrow into walls.
These are much more like worm casts that were into the wall. Trilobites make more sense to me because those are individual hot dog-shaped things that attach themselves to the wall and dig in.
But hang on. As you can see, there are distinct differences between these confirmed trilobite tracks and what we see in Dr. Frank's tunnels. Is this case really closed? Okay, it's true that no giant sloth fossils have been found in Dr. Frank's tunnels, but the marks don't look exactly like trilobite tracks either. So we can't come down on one side or the other. We're calling this an unexplained phenomenon until we get further proof. Did you know that Charles Darwin spent the last 39 years of his life studying worms? Darwin wanted to prove that all living things, including worms, share an ability to reason rather than act on instinct alone. And after seeing this next video, I think he might have been onto something. Eisenhower State Park, Texas, 2015. One morning after some record-setting rain, a few rangers are checking the park's back roads when they discover this.
It's pretty gross and weird and disgusting.
At first glance, it almost looks like patties of ground beef, oddly arranged straight down the middle of the road. But look closer. Is that one wiggling?
They look to be giant masses of earthworms or annelids, segmented worms. I've honestly never heard of any type of behavior like this before.
So what are these worms doing, and why? Since we couldn't ask them, Gerhard got to theorizing.
One interesting possibility is that we're looking at a spontaneous attempt at evolution. These worms are attempting to build a superorganism.
And these worms wouldn't be the first to try it.
One example would be something called a tunicate. This is a very primitive type of vertebrate that will actually join together and form a massive chain, tens of feet long, and there is an advantage to this in terms of locomotion through the water.
Social insects can do something similar, creating a group of synergetic organisms known as a superorganism.
In times of heavy flooding, you'll often see these complete islands of ants that join together. It's kind of a survival mode where these animals are able to collaborate in order to survive an extreme situation.
And who could forget bees, one of the better-known superorganisms, and the source of inspiration for the term hive mind? Perhaps these worms are exhibiting just that.
I think this is a great example of a very primitive life form, a worm, demonstrating that perhaps it has a level of conscious collective intelligence that is greatly underestimated.
Some scientists are starting to believe that the complex brains that you and I have could have evolved from the very first worms. So does that make worms smart or humans dumb? We'll let you make the call. As for these worm balls, we'll rely on the brains of our experts.
Wow.
First, Dr. Floyd Hayes considers the superorganism theory.
Worms can detect each other through olfactory cues, and they are attracted to larger groups of worms, so they like to socialize for some reason.
While worms do socialize to some degree, Hayes notes that true superorganisms are eusocial. They have designated individuals that reproduce and others that don't.
They have a very complex society. These worms are not examples of eusocial animals, so I would not classify them as a superorganism.
Okay, if superorganism isn't the right word, what is?
It's hard to understand why exactly they're gathered together in the road there. It may be drying up a little bit, and one potential benefit of grouping together would be that they could stay more humid for a longer period of time.
Dr. Hayes brings up an important point. Worms need moisture to live. The mucus on a worm's skin actually acts as a medium for oxygen absorption, meaning that in order to breathe, the worm cannot dry out. That's what makes the strange alignment of these worm balls the biggest mystery of all.
It's really strange that the worms seem to congregate in the center of the road almost perfectly. It is probably the driest part of the road. Roads are designed to mound in the center so that water can go off the road.
It's not adding up. If worms need moisture to live, why gather at the driest place available? So folks, we're stumped. While it's not unnatural for animals to herd together, this peculiar behavior is leading us to call this an unexplained phenomenon. In the end, Darwin concluded that despite their small size, worms are just as capable of shaping the landscape as any person. Frankly, after this, who knows what else they're capable of?